So we all know how Lucius isn't just Professor Train's pet cat, right? That he's actually our lovable elder's familiar? And we all know how NRC students aren't technically allowed untrained familiars on campus, like Grim, for example, even though he eventually gets a pass? But what if familiars were just part of life, and what if every one of our lovely NRC students had one? This was a question posed in our lovely Discord community, and I haven't been able to get it out of my mind since, so today I'll be discussing which animal familiars I think each of our favorite Twist Boys would have if they ever were to get one. In doing so, I'll be chatting about EN server story content, so consider this your spoiler warning. I'll also be excluding certain mythical creatures from a consideration because I don't know what the ethics of Malleus owning an actual dragon would be. Because Drago is not exactly sentient and lives within the confines of a game, but I feel like owning another little guy like himself is just not a vibe. I'm also going to try to stay away from giving anyone their animal equivalents. However, for at least one individual, it was inevitable. But for most other folks, I'll do my best not to be so cliche. Now then, let's dive in, starting with Mr. Riddle Rosehearts. So Riddle is obviously getting a hedgehog because they are cute and tiny, just like him. And don't any of you tell him that I said that. But it's quite clear in Ace's vignette story that Riddle has a soft spot in his heart for these spiky little guys, and I think it would be a relatively mess-free pet that his mother might have allowed. Ironically, I can see his mom being the type to get him a goldfish because they don't require that much work, quote unquote, and they can act like a piece of furniture, so to speak, so they're really just not there, even though they are. However, given the hedgehog's ties to the Queen of Hearts and her spirit of strictness being what makes Riddle Riddle, I can also see a hedgehog slipping into his home and heart at a relatively early age. These animals are a little thorny given their spikes, but if they trust you enough, they'll reveal their underfur and let you pet their bellies. Riddle's got a bit of this duality too, as he's honestly rather sweet and level-headed when it comes to most things, but once he's set off, he is as prickly as a rose's thorns, and he can sting quite a bit. With all of these parallels, it's hard to think of any other animal for him, though I'm sure you lovely folks might have some thoughts that I hope you'll share down below. So now, Trey. What could we give a Trey? It's gotta be a normal animal because Trey's the most average Joe around, so what's the most average animal? A dog, perhaps? But what kind of dog? The most common one, of course, because that would be the most normal, right? So according to Google, that dog is the Labrador Retriever, so that's what I'm going to make Trey's familiar. I think this also makes sense outside of it being a normal pet for a normal guy because I can see Trey's parents being okay with getting a dog. Sure, the puppy likely wouldn't be allowed in the bakery due to health concerns, but I do think it'd be a loyal, welcome addition to the family. Plus, it could also help look after his siblings too while his folks are busy, like a fluffy babysitter of sorts. And at school, it could be the dorm's emotional support dog because we all know that they need it. They're just too proud to accept it. But petting a dog is practically a moral obligation, so there wouldn't be any qualms about that, and if a little stress gets relieved along the way, I doubt anyone will complain. Cater, though, is a bit more spicy. He's got a bit more personality, and I think to match this energy, he's gonna need a cockatiel. I feel like Cater probably isn't the most avian-leaning individual, but he is a rock star-leaning individual, and for some reason these birds just have that vibe to me. I think it's because they got the little feather mohawk going on and that they occasionally jam out to music, which gives them that rocker feel. But given that, I think these two would have a wonderful time together. They can sing together for social media, and Cater can play little songs for his bird to keep him happy, and they can cause chaos in Heartsville every once in a while if they want to. Cater also seems like a pretty responsible dude overall too, which he would need to be to properly take care of a bird. Even though he's addicted to social media, he's not so far gone as to be a Magicam monster, and he's rather socially conscious as we see in a couple different events and vignettes, so I think he'd be able to be a decently responsible bird owner too, so I have no qualms about pairing him up with a cockatiel. So though, I think Ace would have a domesticated rabbit, specifically a white one, because that's what I associate most heavily with magicians, and as we've talked about plenty of times on this channel, Ace is very much a magic man. I can imagine this familiar being his brother's pet initially, but even though he was trying to train it to be his magic show partner, the little fluffy fellow just preferred Ace. I can even imagine this little guy being so stubborn that it would only work with Ace, and over time the two's bond grew to the point where the rabbit became his familiar instead. I don't know if that's how familiars work. I'm woefully unaware of their mechanics, but I think it could be a cute story that also somewhat parallels Ace's own stubbornness. He's not traditionally stubborn, but he is very tied to his ideals and how he thinks things should go. And he's not afraid to call out others when they're doing something he disapproves of, and I can see this rabbit's work refusal acting in a similar fashion. I also think it would just be cute for him to bring this rabbit to school, get made fun of for it initially, but once the two perform magic together, the rabbit becomes a mini celebrity in Hartsville. I'm sure Ace would get a kick out of that scenario, and I'm sure his rabbit wouldn't mind the extra snacks that get slipped by the rest of the dorm, so there they are. Deuce now is going to get a chicken for reasons I'm sure I don't have to explain. The guy loves eggs and was a firm believer in eggs' rights, so I think him having a chicken would be rather fitting. Now, I'm sure he wouldn't eat the eggs because he'd assume they were going to hatch, so Dila would have had to swap out the egg Deuce was watching with a new one that the chicken laid the night before. And this little cycle would have happened for quite some time before Deuce noticed. It may have contributed to their temporary rift and have made Deuce even more embarrassed during our lesson in Book 1, but at the end of the day, I think Deuce still really loves his little chicken, and now he can enjoy their eggs guilt-free, which is a fantastic time. With Leona, I had a really hard time trying to figure out an animal for him because I don't think that he would be a very responsible pet owner. I think having a pet would do wonders for his mental health, and being able to care for something outside of himself in that way would likely help him somewhat, I assume. He'd probably be rather reluctant at first and then grow attached and then, be inseparable with whatever it was. Kind of like, how dads are noted to be like the ones that don't want the cat in the house, and then the cat and the dad is like the best of friends ever from that day onward. I don't know. Maybe that would be a path that Leona goes down, but at this point in time, given how he takes care of himself, I really don't see him being a very good pet owner currently. And I don't want to give him an animal that would be a lot of work per se, because I know that work is just going to get dumped on Ruggie, and Ruggie doesn't deserve that. But I have to give Leona something here, don't I? And I can't just give him a lion, right? Because that would be too on the nose, right? Right. Yeah, so I have no idea what other animal would be able to deal with his current lifestyle, so lion it's gonna be. At least if Leona has a lion, then the two can take their little cat naps together, and the lion can patrol the dorm every night when it's awake to make sure the kiddos are behaving. Taking care of a lion would just kind of be like an extension of Leona taking care of himself. And it's a big, powerful cat that's also a symbol of the royal family. So it feels rather natural for him to have one given his position, a connection to his heritage or something like that. And that's about all the mental fortitude I have to explain this choice, so let's move on. Ruggie is getting an animal that I don't think would be super practical for him, but it is one that I imagine he's okay with, and that's a warthog. My entire reasoning for this pairing is Ruggie's little piggy bank that he has in his room, and the fact that I think this animal would be a great protector of him and his grandma. I can even imagine Ruggie choosing to leave his familiar home specifically so that it could protect his granny while he's away. My knowledge of these animals stops at Pumbaa, but Pumbaa was a great uncle and a good protector, so given that this is also a Disney universe, maybe warthogs function in the same way here. According to Wikipedia, the common warthog isn't territorial and instead occupies a home range, which I think could allow Ruggie's familiar to be a protector of his little community too. Given how influential Ruggie was with running his candy smuggling rings during Halloween, and how he brings back all sorts of food over winter break for the kiddos back home, I think it makes sense for his familiar to also be communal in some way. Perhaps it even looks after the neighborhood kids while he's gone off to school, keeping them out of trouble with the authorities as best it can, or something along those lines. I guess in that vein, Meerkat would be better since they're known as lookouts, but they're also kind of skittish, and I think a warthog is more likely to stand its ground, and Ruggie's a bit more like that too, so I'll keep the warthog for him. Jack now is not going to get a wolf, because while that would be thematically appropriate, I guess, I think Jack's got the drive and dedication to take care of almost any kind of animal, so I'm gonna try to get a bit more creative with his. And then I immediately failed and gave him a German Shepherd. Yes, I know that dogs are wolf adjacent, but I couldn't think of a more dedicated, loyal, and protective animal that also gives off Jack vibes. German Shepherds are very much a working breed, and they do have a high level of energy, so they always need a job or some sort of training or something to do. Jack, for his part, always wants to train and better himself and test himself against anyone else, so they could kind of be compared in this way too. German Shepherds also make very loyal pets who can be very protective of their people, which technically can be said for any dog, but I have more experience with this breed, so they're just what came to mind for me. Jack is very loyal, honest, and a bit protective of his friends, although he doesn't really want them to know that, and he's constantly working on improving himself like we previously discussed by pushing his limits. I can see him and this pup training with one another, racing each other, and maybe even, on occasion, protecting Jack's siblings together. So I can easily see this breed being one that his family would be fine with and one that he could have bonded with and attached to. So that's what I've decided to give him here. Now then, in Octavanel, we'll start off with Azul. So now, Azul, do I give him an octopus? I don't know how morally dubious that might be, although the Coral Rush players in EN ride squids and they're pretty darn close, so maybe it wouldn't be a problem. As much as I hate to go so stereotypical, I think I'm going to give him a cephalopod buddy, but to try to make it a bit more fun and sort of kind of break one of my little rules from the intro, I'm giving him a kraken. But Silver, you say? Krakens are mythological creatures, not real animals. And to that I raised a Malleus. And if krakens didn't exist in Twist, then I could just give Azul a giant squid instead, because they're more or less the same animal anyway. Now, I don't think that Azul having this massive beast as a familiar would work in the same way as everyone else. In fact, I feel like this creature would be more of like an ancestral guardian for his family. And as the new addition to said family, he'd be forging his bond as we speak. The beast could have thousands of years of knowledge available for those who are worthy and strong enough to handle it, and I think that would be a great boon for Azul. Now, one might argue that not being able to have your familiar with you all of the time defeats the purpose of having one, and I understand that sentiment. But I think for Azul specifically, knowing that he has a super strong, highly magical friend lurking in the depths, that he need only beckon and it'll come running, is enough reassurance. Plus, it's one of those hidden strengths that he can pull out at any given time to surprise his foes. He might even keep a pet goldfish or tuna just to muddy the waters, to appear less threatening, so folks are more comfortable becoming snared in his net. Who can really say? So, Jade is getting a very special little guy, one that I hope I never run into in my lifetime, and I probably won't since I don't live in Australia, but you never know. Jade's familiar is going to be an urukanji jellyfish, which is a tiny itty bitty little thing that is almost impossible to see in the water. And even once it stings you, you'll only notice the symptoms a whole half hour afterwards. But boy oh boy will you know it, as apparently it feels like death. And there is currently no antivenom in existence. Yep. Get stung by one of these itty bitty babies and you just gotta suffer through the excruciating pain and pray that you survive. I learned about this little bundle of joy from a YouTube short, and even before this consideration, I couldn't help but feel that this is just a very Jade thing. A cute little jellyfish, totally benign in appearance, but the havoc it will wreak on what's left of your life is merciless and excruciating. Kinda like that one thing Jade said in book 4 about what he would do to those who crossed him, dragging them into the murky depths in such a way that they would regret their existence. Something along those lines, you know? Now, I don't know if merfolk would be immune to this neurotoxin or not. Maybe it is just the terrestrial humans. I don't know. But I can imagine Jade figuring out quite a few uses for this regardless, especially since he may or may not be taking over a mafia family in the future. If he was taking on such a role, I'm sure having an undetectable assassin will only aid him in his endeavors, and the two will have a wonderful time of it. Floyd, on the other hand, is not getting an itty-bitty tiny jellyfish. No. Floyd is getting a bull shark, because these bad boys can thrive in both salt and fresh water, meaning you're never fully safe from an encounter, even inland. And that's a very Floyd thing. He's unexpected, inevitable, and just very willing to indulge his whims whenever and wherever they occur. You expect a certain level of chaos from him, and I think the same could be said about this shark species. They're also known to be quite aggressive, even more so than great whites, and given what we see of Floyd in Jade's dream, I think that vibe is on point too. I can see Floyd naturally pairing up with a shark because he tends to hang around shipwrecks and the like, which are known shark hotspots in the Twist universe. At least I think they are, given the ties to The Little Mermaid. Floyd even talks about sharks and shipwrecks in one of his Tropical Ware voice lines where he compares Gontu to a shark he previously tussled with. So I think Floyd would have ample opportunity to meet one of these units and bond with it in whatever violent, chaotic way made the most sense. Now, the two terrorize not only the seas, but NRC too, and I can totally see this shark lurking in the Mastro Lounge aquarium, appearing from the depths as an imminent warning to those annoying Floyd that they're going to have a bad time. It'd be terrifying to be like, hey, this isn't the drink I ordered, only to see a very angry Floyd being backed up by an equally angry shark. Yeah, no thanks. Moving on to Kalim, I think his familiar would be every single animal in existence. I don't know that he'd be able to choose, and I don't think his parents care about buying him any and every animal he desires, but that's a bit silly and not very practical. So I'm going to give him a tiger here like Jasmine had because he's based off the Sultan. This fluffy partner would also help him survive, at least from outer threats, and tigers can be quite deadly, so I think Kalim would be in good hands with his tiger protector. Like, if you're going to bring knives to try to assassinate this kid, you better have more than 18, because that's what you're going up against here, plus teeth. Would it be ethical to have a tiger as a familiar? Probably not. But neither is having a tiny jellyfish that could destroy the entire population of NRC and then some. So, Kalim and everyone else is getting a pass. Plus, in this fantasy universe, the animals can communicate with humans and express their needs fully, and I think one of the conditions that Kalim would have had for his familiar is that he absolutely needs to know how to speak tiger. There is no other way I can see this working. Even if Jamil or someone else managed the tiger, Kalim needs to be aware of his familiar's intentions for both of their safety, and I don't think he'd have a problem with that. I also think the tiger probably views Kalim as the most helpless kitten to ever exist, so it takes exceptionally good care of him. Jamil, I think, would be extremely funny to give a parrot, not just because of Jafar, but because Kalim really wants one. However, we all know he would not take care of it properly, and it would be Jamil's responsibility anyway, and then it would bond with Jamil anyway, and it would likely become his familiar at that point in time. I think if that's how Jamil got the familiar, he might be a little salty about it still, but he probably also derives a small bit of satisfaction from knowing he now has what Kalim has always wanted, and Kalim can never get it back. Parrots are also very intelligent birds, and Jamil is a very intelligent kiddo, so he can keep this little guy occupied with puzzles and tasks and probably even train it to deliver messages or other useful things. It could also stealthily follow Kalim around to keep an eye on him so that Jamil can keep himself out of trouble, and perhaps it could even babysit Kalim from time to time since he's always wanted a parrot and would be happy to hang out with the bird. So whilst a snake likely fits Jamil a little better, a parrot would have more utility, which I think appeals to Jamil overall, so that's who I'm pairing him up with. Beautiful but deadly is kind of Ville's whole aesthetic, and cats by their nature are elegant and graceful, with big cats also having the danger. So, if you were trying to come up with an animal that fits beauty and deadly, I think you'd end up with some sort of panther. In my mind, Ville is either a black panther or mountain lion, because I can't see him willingly repping the spots of jaguars. Not that I think he'd style them badly, but the neutral coat colors of those other two variants would go with more outfits more easily and could be styled themselves a bit easier. Though between the two, I don't really know which would suit Ville better. I feel like Black Panthers are more beautiful, but that could just be because I've been warned about mountain lions for forever, which has hampered their allure to me. But I've never really been warned about Black Panthers, so they're just kind of a big kitty cat in my brain. I guess by that logic, only the mountain lion would have the beauty and the danger that Ville deserves, so that'll be my final choice here. But I feel like any and all panthers could be justified to fit Ville's vibe and aesthetic. Rook, on the other hand, needs a practical animal because Mr. Huntsman can't have his location revealed by a clumsy partner. So I'm going to give him a Malagasy kestrel instead. I admittedly don't know very much about these birds, but they do come up when you Google falconry, and I think that's a sport that Rook would be familiar with. Plus, these birds come from Madagascar, which could be another tie-in for Rook's homeland of the Sunset Savannah, so he may have had access to these birds since he was little and kind of formed bonds with them over time. I also think having a hunting bird versus a hunting dog opens up more possibilities for Rook while also allowing him to retain his stealth. A beagle running up to a house Rook is investigating would be very obvious, but a bird flying overhead almost always goes unnoticed, unless there are bird watchers around. But I think generically it's much more of a given to most folks to just not perceive birds as much as other animals since they're kind of, up there. And having a hunting buddy in any capacity I think would bring him joy. This particular bird is just very pretty to me too, which also suits Rook, I think. But I can't truly speak to its specific abilities, although I'm sure they're impressive. They just kind of vibe together, these two, so that's where I'm gonna leave them. Epel would totally have a rabbit because of his Sled-a-thon plushie and the story that goes along with it. What if instead of letting the rabbit go, it became Epel's familiar instead, and the two have been inseparable since? Now, wild hares are very different from your typical pet store bunny, and I think they suit Epel much better than those domesticated breeds. Epel himself is a little wild, not afraid to scuffle, and has a drive to survive that is admirable. I think that wild rabbits are very similar since they have to navigate the cruel natural world that's always against them and survive in any way they can. It's way different than the pampered life of a pet, and you're bound to get a few scratches here and there, but that just builds up character, right? Epel's got a lot of moxie too, and I can't help but feel that he's quite a character given his constant rebellion against Vil, even if it's done subtly. This little critter would also likely survive well enough in Harveston, which is a requirement since Epel will likely be spending the rest of his life there too. So all in all, I feel like these guys are a vibe, and I reckon they'll continue to be for quite a while. Now then, Idia is going to have a cat. Yes, I am giving him that which his heart desires most, but I don't really know what kind of cat he'd like best. I do think that they would have to be a short-haired breed, given that Idia's got a bunch of technology, and cat hair is going to get everywhere anyway, but long-haired cats come with a lot more maintenance and a lot more hair, so for practicality's sake, it's gotta be a short hair. Personally, I like the idea of giving him an orange cat, not only for the aesthetic contrast, but also because orange cats have a reputation of being no thoughts, head empty, and I think Idia would love that about this little animal. Idia already has all the brain cells anyway, given how super smart he is with his technomatic whoozle-whatsits, and I don't think he can be bothered to really share these brain cells, so orange cat it is. Outside of Idia's canonical desire to have a cat, I don't really have too much else to connect to here, but I just feel like if Idia were to pick an animal to be his buddy that he would be around 24/7, it would 100% be a cat, so it didn't feel right to give him anything else. Now for Ortho, I'm going with an animal that's a little bit out there for him, but I do think it would work with his unique constitution, and that animal is a mantis shrimp. Sea creatures can sometimes come off as otherworldly since they exist so far outside of the terrestrial experience, and I think Ortho by his very nature is someone who is a bit outside of the typical life form experience, so I thought it might be fitting to give him a sea creature despite it perhaps not being super practical. Mantis shrimps are very impressive little guys who can see in a variety of different colors and are quite colorful themselves, which is a fact that always brings me joy, and Ortho is also a very joyful character, so that kind of connected them in my brain. I think Ortho would also have all of the ability and knowledge to successfully run a saltwater aquarium and keep a variety of fish, so having this shrimp shouldn't be too much of a problem for him. And while pistol shrimp have an actual water cannon that can be likened to Ortho's beams, mantis shrimp still punch pretty darn hard, so I think they can count in this way too. So while it is a little out there, I do think it's fitting, and that's what I'm going to be giving him. So now, what kind of familiar can I give a Malleus? Would he get a dragon-adjacent animal like Azul with his kraken, or should he get something else? I contemplated this for a while before coming to the conclusion that Malleus must have the most spoiled, rotten tortoise on the face of the earth. Is this animal intimidating? No. Is it particularly good at anything? Not really. But is it Malleus's precious little buddy? His rotten soldier? His good time boy? Absolutely. And you will never harm his precious little pumpkin, otherwise you'll be turned to ash. Tortoises are notable for their long lifespans, which I think would make this a natural pet for Malleus. Given how attentive he is to gargoyles, I think he absolutely has the shell patterning memorized and can spot any new dips, divots, chips, whatever within seconds. Now, what I'm less certain of is which kind of tortoise Malleus would have, but there was one that I looked up that I think could be cute, at least aesthetically, and that's the Indian star tortoise. There seemed to be a lot of astrological imagery tied to the Briar Valley, since we've got the death metaphor of returning to the stars aligning being a comforting sign during Book 6, but also a lesson for Malleus, the special star mushroom we're introduced to in Azul's dream that only grows in the Briar Valley, etc., etc. While these tortoises don't live quite as long as some others, I do think they'd be thematic, and perhaps familiars by their very nature live longer than regular pets, so maybe this tortoise will live as long as Malleus. Wouldn't that be fun? That or Malleus just raises them on the side like he does for Roaring Drago, and this is one that he's become attached to from the current generation. Either way, I think it'll work out well for him. Lilia, on the other hand, has not one, not two, but a whole colony of bats as his familiars, because there's no way this little cluster, this mask, and this groovy art don't point to a kinship with these animals. Between all the bat imagery surrounding him, the popping up out of nowhere upside down, the misdirect of tomato juice instead of blood, everything that he does kind of connects to a bat in some way, or at least to like vampires, which are also connected to bats. So bats just work. They just do. And having this network of little spies would have been very helpful during the war, and probably is really helpful now keeping tabs on or finding Malleus. The downside to bats is that they are nocturnal, so daytime outings are a bit of a no-go, and they can be a little fragile. But other than that, they seem like wonderful little fellas. I also wouldn't be surprised if Lilia's little group was made up of all different kinds of bats, or maybe just all of them. All of the bats. Every bat in existence. They're all Lilia's. Maybe, maybe not. I can't say for sure. But I do know for a fact that Lilia has at least 2 bats, because one needs a buddy, because they might get sick of him, so they need another little buddy. So there's gotta be at least 2. And then if you have 2, you might as well have 3, and so on and so forth. Now then, Sebek doesn't really strike me as the kind of guy to have more than one familiar, if he has one at all. But I can see him having a turtle of some kind. Not a tortoise, not yet, but a turtle to train his husbandry skills so that he may one day be worthy enough of taking care of one of Malleus's tortoises. Or at least that is what he's convinced himself of, because he refused to accept that he couldn't say tortoise as a kid and his parents misheard his request as turtle. That never happened. However, during the process of taking care of this creature, Sebek has grown quite attached, and now he gloats about the strength of his turtle and its noble shell and its steadfast dedication to its lifestyle. I really want to give him a snapping turtle specifically, however, I can't justify his parents giving a small child who cannot pronounce the word tortoise one of the most dangerous turtles in existence. I do think there could have perhaps been a mix-up with the baby turtles at the turtle store, and because the snapper eventually became a familiar, it's much more friendly and meek with the family and friends, and therefore would not be as concerning. But with Leona, or any potential enemy, snappity snap snap snap. On a much less aggressive note, Silver is getting a little owl as his familiar, and it's not because of the silver owls in the slightest. I was actually going to give Silver a bluebird because that seemed like a very Disney princess familiar to have, but then I remembered Aurora dancing with the owl in the movie, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a nice, strong, but cute bird I could give him that has canonical ties to... Oh, that's where the silver owls came from, huh? And with that revelation fresh in my brain, I came to the conclusion this would actually be really cool foreshadowing to nod to Silver's heritage. Like, if we met him at the beginning of the game and he had a pet owl, it could have tied him even more concretely to Aurora, but I don't think anyone would have assumed that he was actually like a descendant of Aurora's, right? Regardless, I think an owl suits him well, and while in the movie I think this bird is a great horned owl, I'm going to give Silver a long-eared owl instead. They just seem goofier and much less serious while still having similar features, and I think that fits Silver's overall character better. Yes, he can be regal and mysterious, but he's also a big softy airhead, so he's gotta get a bird with a little bit of that duality, no? But with that, we've come to the end of our consideration for today. Did you agree with my picks, or did you think there are other familiars better suited to the boys? Let me know down below, and while you're there, let me know if you enjoyed the video and want more content like it. You could also like and subscribe to show your support, and like always, before you go, I'd just like to remind you that you're amazing, and I hope you have a wonderful day.